My husband looked me dead in the eye and said, "You were never my favorite." The words hit me like ice water at 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday night in our king-sized bed with the Egyptian cotton sheets I picked out 3 years ago. You were never my favorite. My husband David said it so matter-of-factly, like he was commenting on the weather or asking me to pass the remote. His hazel eyes, the same ones I'd fallen in love with 12 years ago, stared directly into mine without even a flicker of remorse. I'd been lying there in my lavender pajamas, the ones he'd complimented just last week, thinking we were having one of those rare intimate conversations that married couples with 3 kids never seem to find time for anymore. We'd been talking about Emma's upcoming piano recital, about how proud we were of Jake making varsity soccer as a sophomore, about little Mia's reading progress in 1st grade. Normal things. Good things. Then somehow the conversation had drifted to marriage, to us, to how we'd built this life together. I'd been feeling nostalgic, grateful even, running my fingers through his salt and pepper hair that had started going gray right after Mia was born. "I love our life," I'd whispered, pressing closer to him in the darkness of our master bedroom. "I love what we've created together." That's when his body went rigid beside me. That's when the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. "Sarah." His voice had taken on that clinical tone he used with difficult clients at the law firm. "I need to be honest with you about something." My stomach had clenched immediately. Honest about what? Was he having an affair? Had he been fired? Was someone sick? I'd been thinking a lot lately about Rebecca. Rebecca. His first wife. The woman who died in a car accident 8 months before we met at that coffee shop in downtown Portland. The woman whose photo he'd finally put away in his dresser drawer after we got engaged, but whose memory seemed to hover over our marriage like expensive perfume that never quite faded. What about her? I'd asked, though every instinct screamed at me not to. About how different things were with her. How different I felt. He turned to face me then, propping himself up on his elbow. "She just got me, you know? In ways that..." "That what, David?" The pause stretched between us for what felt like hours but was probably only 30 seconds. "In ways that you don't." I'd stared at him, waiting for the punchline, waiting for him to say he was just processing grief or having a weird moment or literally anything that would make those words not mean what they clearly meant. Instead, he doubled down. "I loved Rebecca completely. Effortlessly. With you, it's always felt like work. Like I was trying to recreate something that was already perfect." His thumb had actually stroked my cheek while he said this, like he was comforting me while simultaneously destroying me. "You're a good wife, Sarah. A great mother. But you were never my favorite." Now I lay there frozen, watching my husband roll over and close his eyes like he hadn't just detonated a nuclear bomb in our bedroom. Like he hadn't just casually informed me that our entire 12-year marriage, our 3 children, our $2.3 million house in the Pearl District, our carefully curated life was all just his consolation prize. My phone on the nightstand glowed 11:52 p.m. David's breathing had already evened out into sleep. And I realized, with crystal clear certainty, that I was about to become his favorite successor in more ways than one. I didn't sleep. Not even for 5 minutes. Instead, I lay there listening to David's contented snores, the same snores that had annoyed me for years but that I'd learned to find endearing because that's what good wives do. They find their husbands' flaws endearing. They adapt. They make it work. But as the digital clock ticked from 11:52 to 12:47 to 2:13 a.m., something cold and sharp crystallized in my chest. It wasn't heartbreak, though that was there too. It was clarity. At 3:20 a.m., I slipped out of bed and padded downstairs to David's home office. I'd always respected his privacy. In 12 years of marriage, I'd never snooped through his computer, never opened his mail, never even sat in his leather desk chair without permission. The perfect, trusting wife. The consolation prize who knew her place. But Rebecca was dead, and I was very much alive. And alive people have advantages that memories don't. David's laptop was password protected, but I knew him better than he thought I did. He'd used the same password for everything since college, Rebecca 1985. Her name and birth year. Of course. The screen illuminated my face in the darkness as I scrolled through his files. Email folders organized by client name, legal briefs, expense reports. All perfectly normal until I found a folder labeled Personal R. My hands trembled as I clicked it open. Photos. Hundreds of them. Rebecca at the beach, Rebecca laughing at some restaurant I'd never been to, Rebecca in a wedding dress that was infinitely more elegant than mine had been. But worse than the photos were the documents underneath. A Word file titled Rebecca, Things to Remember, that was 17 pages long. 17 pages of memories, inside jokes, favorite songs, the exact shade of lipstick she wore, MAC Russian Red, her coffee order, oat milk Cordido with an extra shot, even the brand of perfume that made her sneeze, anything with jasmine. He documented every detail of her like she was a museum exhibit he was curating. But the real knife twist was the file labeled Comparison Notes with today's date. I opened it. Asterisk Sarah made Emma's Halloween costume from scratch this year. Rebecca would have bought one, but she would have found the perfect vintage one at that antique shop on Hawthorne. More effortless style asterisk. Asterisk Sarah keeps trying to get me to go to couples therapy. Rebecca never needed to work at our relationship. It just flowed, asterisk. Asterisk Sarah redecorated the living room again. She tries so hard to make everything perfect. Rebecca never tried, she just was perfect, asterisk. The document went on for 3 pages. 3 pages of my life dissected and found wanting when measured against a ghost. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely scroll, but I kept reading because I needed to understand the full scope of my husband's betrayal. This wasn't a momentary lapse or late-night honesty. This was systematic. Calculated. He'd been building a case against me for years. The last entry was from 2 weeks ago. Asterisk Sarah said she loved our life tonight. I didn't have the heart to tell her that our life is just a pale imitation of what I had with Rebecca. Maybe I should. Maybe honesty would be kinder, asterisk. Kinder. He thought what he'd done tonight was kind. I closed the laptop and sat in his chair in the darkness of his office, surrounded by his law degree and his awards and the framed photo of our family that I'd had professionally taken last Christmas. We looked so happy in that photo. The perfect family. At 4:17 a.m., I finally understood something that should have been obvious years ago. I hadn't been married to David. I'd been married to Rebecca's widower. And there's a difference that matters more than I ever could have imagined. But here's what David didn't know about his consolation prize. I'd spent 12 years learning how to be the perfect wife, the perfect mother, the perfect partner. And perfect women are very, very dangerous when they finally decide to stop being perfect. I crept back upstairs at 4:43 a.m., slipped into bed beside my sleeping husband, and stared at the ceiling until my alarm went off at 6:15. David stirred when I got up, mumbling something about coffee before rolling back into his pillow. "I'll start the pot," I said, my voice perfectly normal. 12 years of practice had taught me how to sound like the Sarah he expected, even when I felt like a stranger in my own skin. By 6:45, I had coffee brewing, Emma's lunch packed with the crusts cut off her sandwich just how she liked, and Jake's soccer uniform laid out for practice after school. The morning routine I'd perfected over thousands of identical mornings. David appeared in the kitchen at 7:12, already dressed in his charcoal Tom Ford suit, the one I picked out for his birthday 2 years ago because Rebecca never had the chance to develop opinions about his professional wardrobe. That was all me. "Morning," he said, kissing my cheek like nothing had changed. Like he hadn't spent the night sleeping peacefully next to the woman he'd just demoted to second place. "Good morning." I handed him his coffee in the navy blue mug that said World's Best Dad, a Mother's Day gift from Mia last year because she'd mixed up the holidays. We'd laughed about it for weeks. He scrolled through his phone while drinking his coffee, probably checking emails from his law firm, Morrison, Klein & Associates. David was a senior partner specializing in corporate mergers, pulling in $847,000 last year according to the tax returns I dutifully organized and filed. "I've got the Hartwell deposition today," he said without looking up. "Might be late tonight." "Of course." I refilled his mug. "I'll keep dinner warm." The same conversation we'd had hundreds of times. But this morning I found myself really looking at him, studying the way he held his phone, the casual way he assumed I'd rearrange my evening around his schedule, the complete absence of any awkwardness about our conversation just 7 hours ago. That's when it hit me. This wasn't the first time he'd compared me to Rebecca. This was just the first time he'd said it out loud. At 7:45, I walked the kids to the corner where they caught their respective buses. Emma chatted about her science project on volcanoes, completely absorbed in explaining how lava flows work. Mia held my hand and pointed out every dog we passed, convinced she could identify breeds better than the adults. Jake was quieter, focused on the history test he'd been studying for all week. My children. Our children. The 3 people who would be collateral damage in whatever came next. As I walked back to the house, I noticed Mrs. Patterson from next door collecting her newspaper in her bathrobe. She waved, and I waved back, both of us playing our parts in the suburban theater we'd all agreed to perform in. But something had shifted overnight. The familiar weight of my wedding ring felt different on my finger. The house that had always felt like home now felt like a museum dedicated to a life that was apparently never quite real enough. I spent the morning doing what I always did: laundry, grocery planning, scheduling Emma's dentist appointment, researching summer camps for Mia. The invisible labor that kept our family functioning while David built his career on the foundation I provided. At 11:30 a.m., I did something I'd never done before. I called Morrison, Klein & Associates and asked to speak with David's assistant, Jennifer. "Hi Jennifer, it's Sarah Mitchell. I need to ask you about something, and I need you to be completely honest with me." Jennifer's pause lasted 3 seconds too long. "Oh, hi Sarah. Is everything okay?" I'd known Jennifer Walsh for 6 years. She'd been David's assistant since 2018, and we'd chatted at firm holiday parties, exchanged pleasantries when I dropped off forgotten files or lunch. She was efficient, professional, and absolutely devoted to David in that way that good assistants are devoted to partners who make their jobs easier. "I need to ask you about Rebecca," I said, settling into David's desk chair with a cup of tea. "David's been struggling lately. Having dreams about her, talking about her more. I'm worried about him." It was a perfect lie. Concerned wife, devoted husband, therapeutic concern. Everything Jennifer would expect from the Sarah she knew. "Oh." Another pause. I mean, I wouldn't really know about his personal. Jennifer. I made my voice gentle, conspirative. "We both care about David. And I think there are things happening that I don't understand. Has he been acting differently at work? Distracted? Making unusual requests?" Silence stretched across the phone line. I could practically hear Jennifer's internal debate, loyalty to her boss versus genuine concern for a man she'd watched struggle with something I was only now beginning to comprehend. "He visits her grave," she finally whispered. "Every month. On the 15th. He has me block out 2 hours on his calendar and mark it as personal appointment. He's done it since before I started working for him." My tea mug froze halfway to my lips. "Every month?" "Sometimes more. Last month he went 3 times. And Sarah." Jennifer's voice dropped even lower. "He expenses the flowers through the firm. Charges them to general office supplies. White roses, always white roses, from that expensive florist on Morrison Street. $89 every time. $89. I knew exactly how much that was because I'd seen those charges on our credit card statements for years. When I'd asked about them, David said they were client gifts or office arrangements. I'd never questioned it because why would I? Perfect wives don't interrogate flower purchases. "How long has he been doing this?" I asked. "The flowers?" "Since I started. But Sarah, there's something else." Jennifer sounded genuinely worried now. "He has a standing order with Tiffany and Company. Every year on their wedding anniversary, April 22nd, he has me coordinate the purchase and delivery of white gold jewelry to be placed on her grave. Earrings, bracelets, sometimes necklaces. He spent $12,000 in the last 3 years alone. April 22nd. The date that David always seemed slightly off, slightly distant. The date I'd learned to navigate carefully without ever understanding why. I'd assumed it was general grief, the kind of anniversary sadness that comes with losing someone young. I'd made special dinners those nights, rented his favorite movies, tried to be extra attentive. While he was buying jewelry for a dead woman. "Jennifer, I need you to do something for me," I said, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. I need you to print out every expense report that includes those flower charges for the last 5 years. And any documentation about the Tiffany purchases. Sarah, I can't. David is my husband. Those are our joint assets being used for these purchases. And if he's expensing personal items through the firm, that's a violation of ethics rules, isn't it? Jennifer went very quiet. As a legal assistant, she knew exactly what I was implying. Law firms don't mess around with financial improprieties, especially when it comes to personal expenses being charged to client accounts or firm operations. I could lose my job, she whispered. Only if David finds out. And David's not going to find out because David's not going to be in any position to care about your job much longer. The words surprised me as much as they surprised Jennifer. I hadn't planned to say them. But sitting in David's chair, staring at his perfect office while processing the scope of his deception, something crystallized. Meet me at Pioneer Square at 1 o'clock, I said. Bring the documents. And Jennifer? Thank you for caring about him enough to tell me the truth. I hung up and stared at David's diploma on the wall. 12 years of marriage, and I was just now learning how my husband spent our money. But more than that, I was learning who my husband really was. At 12:47 p.m., I stood in Pioneer Square holding a manila envelope that contained my marriage certificate, feeling like I was about to trade it for evidence that would end everything. Jennifer appeared right on time, clutching a thick folder against her chest like armor. She looked smaller than I remembered from the holiday parties, mid-30s, auburn hair pulled back in a neat bun, the kind of professional competence that made partners like David function seamlessly. I printed everything going back to 2019, she said without preamble, glancing around nervously. Sarah, are you sure about this? David's been good to me. He gave me a $15,000 bonus last Christmas, and when my mom was sick, he let me work remotely for 3 months. He gave you a bonus with money he earned while I managed his entire personal life, I said, accepting the folder. Jennifer, I need you to understand something. I'm not the enemy here. I opened the folder on a nearby bench. Page after page of expense reports, all bearing David's signature, all charging office florals and client appreciation gifts to Morrison, Klein and Associates. The amounts were staggering when added up, $4,267 in flowers alone over 5 years. But worse were the Tiffany receipts. April 22, 2023, $4,200 for white gold pearl earrings, delivered to Riverdale Cemetery. April 22, 2022, $3,850 for a white gold bracelet with sapphire accents, delivered to Riverdale Cemetery. April 22, 2021, $4,100 for a white gold necklace with diamond pendant, delivered to Riverdale Cemetery. Jennifer, look at these dates, I said, my voice barely steady. April 22, 2021. Do you know what else happened that day? She shook her head. That was Mia's 5th birthday party. I spent 3 weeks planning a princess theme, made her cake from scratch, invited 12 kids to our house. David disappeared for 2 hours that afternoon and came back saying he'd had to handle a work emergency. I stared at the receipt. He was buying his dead wife a $4,100 necklace during our daughter's birthday party. Jennifer's face went pale. Oh, Sarah. Every major milestone in our kids' lives, every anniversary, every moment that should have been about us, he was secretly commemorating her. I flipped through more pages. Look at this one. May 15, 2022. That's Emma's 8th grade graduation day. He charged $127 in flowers while I was sitting alone in the school auditorium wondering why he was taking work calls during our daughter's ceremony. The pattern was undeniable. Every significant date in our family's life had been shadowed by David's pilgrimages to Rebecca's grave. Christmas bonuses spent on jewelry for a corpse. Anniversary flowers for a woman who'd been dead for 13 years while I received grocery store bouquets on Valentine's Day. There's something else, Jennifer said quietly. The managing partners have been asking questions about David's expense reports. Nothing official yet, but Margaret Klein pulled me aside last week asking about the frequency of his client entertainment charges. Apparently, some clients have mentioned they never received the gifts that were allegedly purchased for them. My blood went cold. How much trouble could he be in? For expense fraud? If they can prove he's been systematically billing personal expenses to the firm for years? Jennifer looked sick. Termination. Possible criminal charges. Definitely a bar complaint that could cost him his license. I closed the folder and stood up. David's entire career, the foundation of our family's financial security, was built on a lie. He'd been stealing from his own firm to fund his obsession with a dead woman. Jennifer, I need one more favor, I said. David's computer password. I need access to his work files. Sarah, I absolutely cannot. The password is Rebecca 1985, isn't it? Her silence was confirmation enough. He's using his dead wife's name as his work password while charging the firm for flowers for her grave, I continued. How many other ethical violations do you think we'll find if we look hard enough? Jennifer stared at me for a long moment, then pulled out her phone. His calendar is completely clear Thursday afternoon. He'll be in depositions all morning, then off-site client meetings until 6 p.m. Thank you, I said, meaning it. And Jennifer? When this all comes out, make sure Margaret Klein knows you're the one who brought the discrepancies to light. Whistleblowers get protection. Accomplices get fired. I walked back to my car with the folder tucked under my arm, feeling the weight of David's deception in my hands. But for the first time since last night, I also felt something else, power. David thought he'd married his second choice. He was about to learn what happens when second choices decide to stop accepting second place. I spent Thursday morning at Riverdale Cemetery. Finding Rebecca's grave was easier than it should have been. The groundskeeper, a weathered man named Frank who'd worked there for 23 years, knew exactly who I meant when I mentioned the woman who gets white roses every month. Plot 247, Section C, he said, pointing toward a grove of oak trees. Beautiful headstone. Someone sure loves her a lot. Rebecca and Morrison Mitchell. 1985 to 2011, beloved wife, taken too soon. Her headstone was black granite, elegant and expensive, with fresh white roses arranged in a crystal vase. The same roses David had been buying for $89 a month while I clipped coupons for our grocery shopping. But it was what surrounded the headstone that made my knees nearly buckle. Jewelry boxes. Dozens of them, weathered by rain and sun but still recognizable as Tiffany blue. Someone, David, had been leaving them here for years, like offerings at a shrine. I knelt down and opened the nearest one. Empty, but the satin interior still bore the impression of whatever necklace or bracelet had once nested there. The wind had scattered most of the jewelry long ago, but I could see glints of metal caught in the grass around the grave. Hundreds, maybe thousands of dollars worth of white gold and diamonds, left to tarnish in the Oregon rain. He comes here every few weeks, a voice said behind me. I turned to find an elderly woman with silver hair and kind eyes, holding a small bouquet of carnations. I'm Dorothy, she said. My Harold's buried 2 plots over. I've been visiting him every Tuesday for 6 years, and I always see your husband here. Usually around lunchtime, always with those expensive roses. What does he do when he visits? I asked, surprised by how normal my voice sounded. Dorothy settled beside Harold's headstone, arranging her carnations carefully. Talks to her mostly. Sometimes for over an hour. Last month I heard him telling her about some soccer game, said he wished she could have seen it. She glanced at me sympathetically. I always wondered about his family. A man that devoted to his late wife must be hard on his current one. Current one. Like I was Rebecca's replacement model. Does he ever mention his children? His life now? Oh, honey. Dorothy's voice was gentle. He talks to her like she's the only person who ever mattered. I've never heard him mention anyone else. I thanked Dorothy and walked back to my car, leaving Rebecca with her roses and her scattered jewelry and her devoted widower who'd built a second family but never moved on from his first. At 2:47 p.m., I sat in David's office at Morrison, Klein & Associates, using his Rebecca 1985 password to access files that would destroy his career. His computer was a roadmap of deception. Email folders labeled personal R contained drafted but never sent messages to Rebecca's old email address, hundreds of them, spanning years. Love letters to a corpse, written while I was home with his children. Asterisk Rebecca, Emma lost her first tooth today. I started to call your name to show you before I remembered. Sarah handled it fine, but you would have made it magical asterisk. Asterisk Mia asked me why I seem sad sometimes. I wanted to tell her it's because you're not here to see how beautiful she's becoming, but I said I was just tired. Sarah thinks I work too much asterisk. Asterisk Jake made varsity soccer. I drove straight here after the game instead of going to the celebration dinner Sarah planned. I needed to tell you first asterisk. The timestamps broke my heart and ignited my fury in equal measure. Messages composed while I was making dinner, helping with homework, managing the household that supported his ability to grieve full-time. But David's emotional infidelity was just the beginning. His financial records revealed systematic theft from his firm spanning 5 years. Client entertainment expenses that were actually grave gifts. Office supply charges that were cemetery flowers. Conference fees that were jewelry purchases. The total came to $67,342 in fraudulent expenses. I forwarded everything to my personal email, then composed a message to Margaret Klein, the managing partner Jennifer had mentioned. Asterisk Ms. Klein, I believe you should be aware of serious financial irregularities in David Mitchell's expense reports. Please see attached documentation. I think you'll find it requires immediate investigation. Regards, a concerned party asterisk. My finger hovered over send for exactly 37 seconds. Then I clicked it, and David's career began to die. At 4:23 p.m., my phone rang while I was sitting in my car outside the law firm, watching David's colleagues through the floor-to-ceiling windows of their conference room. Mrs. Mitchell? This is Margaret Klein from Morrison, Klein & Associates. My heart hammered against my ribs. Yes? I received some concerning documentation today regarding your husband's expense reports. I wonder if we might arrange a meeting to discuss this matter privately? Of course, I said, proud of how steady I sounded. When would be convenient? Would tomorrow morning work? Say, 9 a.m.? David will be in court all day on the Pemberton case, so we'd have privacy to address these issues. Privacy to address these issues. Legal speak 4, we need to figure out how badly your husband has been stealing from us before we decide whether to fire him or have him arrested. I'll be there, I said. After hanging up, I sat in the parking garage watching David's BMW in its reserved spot, the car I'd helped him pick out 3 years ago, the one with payments that came out of our joint account. Everything in our life was joint, shared, communal. Everything except his heart, apparently. My phone buzzed with a text from Jennifer. Asterisk Margaret called an emergency partner meeting for 5 p.m. David's been summoned back from court. I think they're moving fast, asterisk. I drove home through Portland traffic, past the coffee shop where David and I had met 13 years ago, past the hospital where Emma and Jake and Mia had been born, past the life we'd built together that was about to implode. At 5:47 p.m., I was folding laundry in our bedroom when I heard David's BMW pull into our driveway with the aggressive acceleration he used when he was furious. The front door slammed hard enough to rattle the windows. Sarah. His voice echoed through our house with an edge I'd rarely heard. Sarah, get down here right now. I took my time finishing the pillowcase I was folding, smoothing out every wrinkle with deliberate care. Let him wait. Let him wonder. For 12 years, I jumped when he called. I found him pacing in our living room, still wearing his court suit but with his tie loosened and his hair disheveled. His face was flushed with rage and something that looked like panic. Did you go to my office today? He demanded without preamble. I went to several places today, I said calmly. The grocery store, Emma's school for the parent-teacher conference you forgot about, the dry cleaner to pick up your shirts. Don't play games with me, Sarah. Someone sent Margaret Klein documentation about my expense reports. Detailed documentation that could only have come from my computer or Jennifer's files. I settled into the cream-colored armchair I'd reupholstered last spring, another one of those household projects I tackled while David worked late or visited graves or composed love letters to dead women. That sounds serious, I said. What kind of documentation? David stopped pacing and stared at me. I watched him seeing me, really seeing me, maybe for the first time in years. His consolation prize wife, sitting calmly while his carefully constructed world caught fire. They're launching an investigation, he said quietly. Into potential embezzlement and expense fraud. They've suspended me pending the outcome. Oh, David. I made my voice soft, concerned. That must be terrifying. What will happen if they find irregularities? If they find, he cut himself off, studying my face. You know exactly what will happen, don't you? I smiled at him then. The same smile I'd given him when he told me I was never his favorite. I know a lot of things now, I said. The question is, what are you going to do about it? David sank onto the couch across from me, his head in his hands. For a moment, he looked older than his 46 years, defeated in a way I'd never seen before. Almost vulnerable. Then he lifted his head, and his expression hardened into something calculating. What do you want? He asked. The question hung between us like a challenge. What did I want? 24 hours ago, I would have said I wanted our marriage to work, our family to stay together, for him to love me the way I'd loved him for 12 years. Now I knew better. I want you to tell the children about Rebecca, I said. David's face went white. Absolutely not. Emma's 14, David. Jake's 16. They're old enough to understand that their father has been living a double life. I crossed my legs, settling deeper into my chair. They should know why Daddy disappears on their birthdays. Why family celebrations make him distant. Why he's never quite present even when he's in the room. Sarah, you can't. Can't what? Tell our children the truth about their father? I tilted my head, studying him. Or maybe you're worried they'll start wondering what else you've been lying about. David stood up abruptly, pacing to the window that overlooked our backyard. The swing set was visible from here, the elaborate wooden playset I'd researched for months before Emma's 8th birthday, the one David had been too busy to help assemble because he'd had client meetings that day. Another lie, probably. The firm is freezing my accounts pending the investigation, he said without turning around. They've locked me out of the building. Margaret gave me exactly 30 minutes to clear out my personal items while security watched. I felt a flutter of satisfaction, quickly suppressed. How long will the investigation take? Weeks. Maybe months. His shoulders sagged. And Sarah, there's something else. Something I haven't told you. Of course there was. I waited. The Pemberton merger, the one I'd been working on for 8 months, it fell through today. The client fired us because of the investigation. They can't have their deal handled by a firm with potential ethics violations. He turned to face me, and I saw real fear in his eyes. That was a $2.8 million account. Margaret made it clear that if the other partners decide I'm a liability, they'll force you out, I finished. They'll destroy me. Bar complaint, possible criminal charges, professional humiliation. David's voice cracked slightly. Sarah, I could lose everything. My license, my career, our house. Your career, I corrected softly. Your license. Your reputation that you built while I raised your children and managed your household and played second fiddle to a ghost. The words hit him like a physical blow. He actually stepped backward. I know you're angry, he said carefully. And you have every right to be. What I said last night was cruel and wrong, and What you said last night was honest, I interrupted. For the first time in our marriage, you told me exactly how you feel. I should thank you for that. Sarah. Mia has a dentist appointment tomorrow at 3, I said, standing up. Emma's piano recital is Saturday at 7. Jake's soccer banquet is next Tuesday, the one you've missed 3 years running. I smoothed my skirt, suddenly feeling lighter than I had in years. I assume you'll want to be present for these things now that you have so much free time. I walked toward the kitchen, then paused in the doorway. Oh, and David? You might want to call a criminal defense attorney. I hear Morrison, Klein and Associates has some excellent ones. Though I suppose you can't afford their rates anymore. As I started dinner preparations, I could hear David's phone ringing in the living room. Margaret Klein's name appeared on the caller ID through the kitchen pass-through. The reckoning was just beginning. That evening, while David huddled in his office making desperate phone calls to criminal defense attorneys, I did something I should have done years ago. I called my sister Lisa. Sarah? It's almost 10 p.m. Are you okay? Lisa's voice carried that immediate concern that came from growing up with an alcoholic father. She could detect crisis from 3 time zones away. I need you to look up everything you can find about Rebecca Morrison, I said, settling into the guest bedroom with my laptop. David's first wife. I need to know who she really was. Jesus, Sarah. What's going on? I gave Lisa the abbreviated version, David's cruel honesty, the financial fraud, the systematic deception that had apparently defined our entire marriage. My sister, an investigative journalist for the Seattle Times, listened without interruption until I finished. Send me everything you have, she said. Full name, dates, where they lived. I'll have a complete background by morning. At 6:23 a.m., Lisa called back. Sarah, sit down, she said without preamble. Rebecca Morrison wasn't who David told you she was. I was already in David's office, having spent the night compiling my own evidence. Financial records, email printouts, photographs I'd found hidden in his filing cabinet. The scope of his deception kept expanding like ripples in water. What do you mean? Rebecca Morrison was married before David, Lisa said. To a man named Marcus Chin. They divorced in 2009, 2 years before her death. The divorce was messy, allegations of infidelity on both sides, a custody battle over their daughter. My coffee mug slipped from my hands, shattering on David's hardwood floor. Daughter? Chloe Chen, now 24. Works as a graphic designer in San Francisco. Sarah, Rebecca had a child with another man, and David has been sending that girl money every month for the past 5 years. The room tilted sideways. I gripped David's desk chair, trying to process what Lisa was telling me. How much money? According to the financial records I could access, $2,500 monthly. Deposited into an account labeled CC Education Fund at Wells Fargo. Lisa's voice gentled. Sarah, there's more. Rebecca's marriage to her first husband ended because she was having an affair. With David. The affair that destroyed Rebecca's first marriage had started while she was still married to Marcus Chin. David, the man who built his career on ethics and professional conduct, had been sleeping with a married woman. The accident that killed her, I whispered. When did it happen? March 15, 2011. But Sarah, she wasn't coming home from work like David probably told you. Police reports show she was leaving David's apartment at 11:47 p.m. during a thunderstorm. She'd been there for over 6 hours. I stared at David's computer screen, where his drafted emails to Rebecca's ghost glowed in the morning light. Love letters to a woman who'd died rushing away from him in the middle of the night, probably after a fight. There's something else, Lisa continued. Rebecca's ex-husband, Marcus Chen? He's been trying to contact David for 3 years. Apparently, Chloe doesn't know David exists, but Marcus figured out where the monthly payments were coming from. He's been demanding that David either formally acknowledge his relationship to Chloe or stop the payments entirely. Footsteps echoed in the hallway outside David's office. He was awake. Lisa, I have to go, I whispered. Sarah, be careful. Men like David, when they're cornered. I hung up just as David appeared in his office doorway, wearing the same clothes from yesterday and looking like he'd slept in his chair. His eyes went immediately to the broken coffee mug, then to the papers scattered across his desk, then to my face. We need to talk about Chloe, I said. The color drained from his face so fast I thought he might faint. David's mouth opened and closed twice before any sound came out. How do you know about Chloe? He finally managed. I stood up from his desk chair, stepping carefully around the broken ceramic. The same way I found out about the $67,342 you stole from your law firm. The same way I found out about your monthly pilgrimages to Rebecca's grave while our children celebrated their birthdays. I picked up the printed bank statements Lisa had helped me access. $2,500. Every month for 5 years. To a girl who doesn't even know you exist. David slumped against the doorframe like his strings had been cut. Sarah, you don't understand. Then explain it to me. I held up the Wells Fargo statements. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you've been playing father to Rebecca's daughter while emotionally abandoning your own children. She's not just Rebecca's daughter, David said quietly. She's complicated. The way he said it made my blood run cold. Complicated how? David walked to his office window, staring out at our backyard where Emma's old bike lay forgotten by the garden shed. The same bike I taught her to ride because David had been too busy with work that weekend. Another lie, probably. Chloe looks exactly like Emma, he said finally. Same dark hair, same eyes, same smile. When I first saw her picture on Rebecca's Facebook page, I thought. He trailed off. You thought what, David? He turned to face me, and for the first time in our marriage, I saw him completely stripped of pretense. Vulnerable in a way that might have moved me 24 hours ago. I thought she might be mine. The words hit me like ice water. What? Rebecca and I were together for almost a year before Marcus found out about the affair. The timeline, it was possible. David's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. So I had a DNA test done. Quietly. 3 years ago. My legs felt weak. I sat back down in his chair, gripping the armrests. And? She's not mine. But by then, I'd already started sending money. Rebecca used to talk about wanting to pay for Chloe's college, about how guilty she felt for disrupting her daughter's life with a divorce. David's voice cracked. After Rebecca died, supporting Chloe felt like keeping a promise. While our children went to public school because we couldn't afford private tuition, I said slowly. While I clipped coupons and bought generic groceries because money was tight. While you told me we needed to wait another year before renovating the kitchen. David flinched as if I'd slapped him. Emma asked for art lessons last year, I continued, my voice gaining strength. Real lessons, with a professional instructor. You said it wasn't in the budget. That was $150 a month. You were sending 17 times that amount to a stranger. She's not a stranger. She is to your actual children. I stood up so fast the chair rolled backward. Jake needed a tutor for calculus. Mia wanted to join the swim team. Emma begged for that photography camp. All denied because Daddy said we needed to be financially responsible. David's phone started buzzing on his desk. Margaret Klein's name flashed on the screen. He stared at it like it was a bomb. Answer it, I said. Let's find out how much worse this gets. David picked up the phone with shaking hands. Hello, Margaret. Even from across the room, I could hear the sharp edge in Margaret Klein's voice. David, we need you to come in immediately. The preliminary audit has uncovered additional discrepancies, and the district attorney's office has some questions about the Pemberton account specifically. David's face went ashen as Margaret continued speaking. I could catch fragments through the phone: forensic accountant, client funds, federal investigation. When he hung up, his hands were visibly trembling. They found more, he said hollowly. The Pemberton account, there were fund transfers I made last year. Temporary ones. I was going to replace the money, but what? My voice was deadly calm. Chloe needed emergency surgery. Her appendix ruptured, and Marcus couldn't cover the medical bills. Rebecca would have wanted. You stole client money. The words fell between us like stones. You didn't just defraud your firm, David. You stole money that belonged to other people. He nodded miserably. $47,000. I moved it from the Pemberton escrow account to cover Chloe's hospital bills, then couldn't replace it before the quarterly audit. I stared at my husband, this man I'd shared a bed with for 12 years, who'd held my hand during labor, who'd taught our son to throw a baseball, and realized I was looking at a stranger. A criminal. The DA wants to see me at 2 o'clock, David continued. Margaret says they're considering federal wire fraud charges because client funds crossed state lines. My phone buzzed with a text from Emma, asterisk mom, Mrs. Patterson says there were news vans on our street this morning? Is everything okay, asterisk? News vans. Of course. Portland's legal community was small and gossipy. A senior partner at Morrison, Klein and Associates being investigated for embezzlement would be front-page news in the legal journals by afternoon. I need to pick up the kids from school, I said, grabbing my purse. Before they hear about this from someone else. Sarah, wait. David's voice was desperate. What do I tell them? About the investigation, about why I might, if I have to go away for a while. The raw fear in his voice almost broke through my resolve. Almost. Then I remembered 16-year-old Jake sitting alone at his soccer banquet last year, scanning the crowd for his father who was too busy grieving his first wife to show up. Tell them the truth, I said. For once in your life, David, just tell them the truth. I collected Emma first, from Roosevelt High School, watching her face crumble as I explained that Daddy was having some problems at work and might be in the news. Is he going to jail? She asked quietly as we drove toward Jake's school. I don't know, sweetheart. Jake took the news with the stoic silence he'd inherited from David, but I saw his hands clench into fists in his lap. Mia, at 6, couldn't quite grasp why Daddy's work problems meant we couldn't go to Disneyland this summer like we'd planned. By 4 o'clock, we were barricaded in our house while 3 news vans idled outside. David was downtown with his newly hired criminal defense attorney, a man named Robert Hayes who specialized in white-collar crime and charged $850 an hour. Money we didn't have for a problem David had created. My phone rang constantly. Other soccer moms, school parents, neighbors who'd seen the news coverage. I let everything go to voicemail. At 6:17 p.m., David came home looking like he'd aged 5 years in one afternoon. Arraignment is Monday, he said, collapsing onto our couch. Formal charges include wire fraud, embezzlement, and money laundering. Hayes thinks he can negotiate a plea deal, maybe avoid jail time if I make full restitution. Full restitution? I almost laughed. David, you don't have $47,000. We don't have $47,000. He looked up at me with hollow eyes. We have the house. And there it was. The final blow. Our home, Emma's childhood bedroom, Jake's basketball hoop in the driveway, Mia's growth chart penciled on the kitchen doorframe, would have to be sold to pay for David's obsession with a dead woman. The kids can't know about Chloe, David said suddenly. Promise me, Sarah. Whatever happens, they can't know I chose someone else's child over them. I stared at my husband, this broken man who destroyed our family for a ghost, and felt something inside me finally snap clean in two. No, I said simply. I'm done protecting you from the consequences of your choices. David's face went white as bone. Sarah, you can't tell them about Chloe. They'll never understand. Understand what? That their father spent their college funds on a stranger? I walked to the kitchen, meeting distance from his desperate eyes. That every family vacation we couldn't afford, every no we gave them was because you were playing secret benefactor to Rebecca's daughter? It wasn't like that. It was exactly like that. I turned to face him from the doorway. Emma's been babysitting for the Hendersons every weekend for 8 months, saving for that photography equipment. $40 at a time, David. While you were writing $2,500 checks to a girl who doesn't know you exist. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number, asterisk Mrs. Mitchell, this is Marcus Chin. We need to talk about David and my daughter. I'm flying to Portland tomorrow, asterisk. I showed David the message, watching his remaining composure crumble entirely. Oh God, he whispered. He's going to tell Chloe everything. About the money, about Rebecca, about, David's voice cracked. She'll find out her mother was having an affair when she died. That the accident happened because Rebecca was sneaking around. Maybe she deserves to know the truth about her mother, I said coldly. The same way our children deserve to know the truth about their father. David's phone rang. Robert Hayes, his criminal attorney, according to the caller ID. Don't answer it, I said. I want to hear this too. David put the call on speaker with shaking hands. David, we have a problem, Hayes said without preamble. The FBI is opening a parallel investigation. The Pemberton account was federally insured, which makes this a banking violation. They're freezing all your assets tomorrow morning, checking, savings, investment accounts, everything. I felt the blood drain from my face. Our entire financial life was joint accounts. What does that mean for his family? I asked. Mrs. Mitchell? I didn't realize you were on the call. Hayes cleared his throat. The asset freeze will include joint accounts, but there are provisions for family living expenses. You'll need to petition the court for access to funds for mortgage, utilities, groceries, basic necessities only. For how long? I managed. Months. Maybe longer if this goes to trial. Hayes' voice was professionally sympathetic. Mrs. Mitchell, I strongly recommend you consult with a divorce attorney immediately. The sooner you legally separate your finances from David's, the better protected you and the children will be. After Hayes hung up, David and I stared at each other across our living room, this room I'd decorated with such care, where our children had taken first steps and lost teeth and opened Christmas presents. All of it about to be swept away by David's choices. A divorce attorney, David repeated numbly. Is that what you want? Before I could answer, Emma appeared in the doorway, still wearing her school uniform, her dark hair pulled back in the ponytail she'd learned to braid herself because David was never around for morning routines. Mom? Jake's been Googling Dad's name, and there are articles saying he might go to prison. Her voice was small, younger than her 14 years. Is that true? I looked at my daughter, this beautiful girl who'd inherited David's eyes and my stubborn chin, and realized the moment for protecting anyone from ugly truths had passed. Yes, sweetheart, I said gently. It's possible. Emma's face crumpled, and David made a wounded sound from the couch. But we're going to figure this out, I continued, walking over to hug Emma. Whatever happens, we're going to be okay. Over Emma's shoulder, I saw David watching us with an expression of absolute devastation. Finally understanding, perhaps, what he'd really lost. The next morning, Marcus Chin stood on my doorstep at 8:23 a.m., looking nothing like I'd expected. Rebecca's ex-husband was smaller than David, maybe 5'8", with graying hair and tired eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. He carried a worn leather messenger bag and the weary expression of a man who'd traveled all night to confront uncomfortable truths. Mrs. Mitchell? I'm Marcus. Thank you for agreeing to meet. I'd sent the kids to school early with Lisa, who'd driven down from Seattle overnight after I'd called her crying at midnight. David was upstairs, presumably getting dressed for another day of legal consultations, though he'd barely spoken since Emma's breakdown last night. Come in, I said, leading Marcus to the kitchen. Coffee? Please. He settled into one of our breakfast bar stools, the same ones where my children ate cereal every morning while David buried himself in his phone. Mrs. Mitchell, Sarah, I want you to know I never intended for things to get this complicated. I poured coffee into 2 mugs, noting absently that one was the world's best dad mug Mia had given David. The irony felt sharp enough to cut. How long have you known? I asked. About the money? 3 years. My accountant flagged the deposits during Chloe's college financial aid applications. Marcus wrapped his hands around the mug like he was trying to warm himself. Regular payments from someone named David Mitchell in Portland. It took me 6 months to connect him to Rebecca. And Chloe doesn't know? Chloe thinks the money comes from Rebecca's life insurance policy. A trust fund I set up after the accident. Marcus's voice was heavy with guilt. She was only 13 when Rebecca died, and she blamed herself for the divorce. I couldn't bear to tell her that her mother was, that Rebecca had been seeing someone else. The kitchen fell silent except for the hum of our refrigerator, the expensive stainless steel one I'd researched for months before buying, back when I thought we were building something permanent together. David told me he had a DNA test done, I said carefully. Marcus nodded. He contacted me directly 3 years ago. Demanded paternity testing, said he had a right to know if Chloe was his daughter. His jaw tightened. The arrogance of it, after what Rebecca put us through during the divorce. After she chose him over her own family. But he's not her father. No. Chloe is mine, biologically and in every way that matters. Marcus met my eyes. But David couldn't seem to accept that. Even after the DNA results, he kept sending money. Kept inserting himself into her life without her knowledge. Footsteps creaked overhead. David was moving around, probably listening to our conversation through the heating vents. In 12 years of marriage, I'd never noticed how sound carried in this house. Marcus, there's something you need to know, I said, lowering my voice. David's been arrested for embezzlement. Some of the money he sent to Chloe was stolen from his clients. Marcus's coffee mug hit the counter hard enough to slosh liquid over the rim. Jesus Christ. How much? $47,000 from client accounts. Plus over $60,000 in fraudulent expenses from his law firm. I handed him paper towels for the spilled coffee. The FBI is investigating. He's looking at federal charges. And Chloe's education money. Tainted evidence in a federal crime. I watched the color drain from his face. Marcus, they'll trace every payment David made. The prosecutors will want to interview Chloe about money she didn't even know she was receiving. Marcus buried his face in his hands. She's graduating from art school next month. She's got a job lined up at a design firm in Portland, of all places. This will destroy her. Portland? My blood went cold. She's moving here? Next month. She found an apartment in the Pearl District, about 6 blocks from David's office. Marcus looked up at me with haunted eyes. Sarah, I think he's been planning something. All these years of payments, and now she's moving to his city? That can't be a coincidence. Before I could respond, David appeared in the kitchen doorway, fully dressed but hollow-eyed. He froze when he saw Marcus, his face cycling through surprise, fear, and something that looked almost like relief. Marcus. David's voice was barely above a whisper. David. Marcus stood up slowly, his hands clenched at his sides. We need to talk about my daughter. And about what you're going to tell the FBI when they start asking questions about stolen money. The two men stared at each other across my kitchen, separated by years of secrets and a dead woman's ghost. And I realized that everything I'd discovered so far was just the beginning. David and Marcus faced each other across my kitchen like gunfighters in an old western, while I stood frozen between them holding a dish rag that suddenly felt absurd in my hands. Chloe doesn't know about the money, Marcus said, his voice tight with controlled anger. And she sure as hell doesn't know her mother's affair partner has been playing secret benefactor for 5 years. I was honoring Rebecca's memory, David replied, but his voice lacked conviction. She wanted Chloe to have opportunities. Rebecca wanted a lot of things, Marcus cut him off. She wanted to leave her family for you, too. How did that work out? The barb hit home. David flinched like he'd been struck. That's enough, I said, stepping between them. Marcus, what exactly did you come here to accomplish? He pulled out his phone, scrolling to something before handing it to me. This is why I flew down here. The screen showed a Facebook message thread between Chloe Chen and someone named Amanda Rivera. I read the first few messages, my stomach dropping with each line. Asterisk Amanda, girl, you're not going to believe this. Remember that job interview you had at Morrison, Klein and Associates? The law firm, asterisk. Asterisk Chloe, yeah, the graphic design contract? What about it, asterisk? Asterisk Amanda, one of the senior partners got arrested yesterday for embezzlement. David Mitchell. Isn't that wild, asterisk? Asterisk Chloe, wait, David Mitchell? That name sounds familiar, why do I know that name, asterisk? Asterisk Amanda, maybe from the news? It's all over Portland legal blogs, asterisk. Asterisk Chloe, no, it's not that. I swear I've heard that name before. Like, personally, asterisk. I handed the phone back to Marcus, my hands trembling slightly. When was this conversation? Yesterday afternoon. She's been texting me all night, asking if I know anyone named David Mitchell. Marcus's voice was grim. She's starting to remember, Sarah. Rebecca used to talk about David around the house before the divorce. Chloe was only 11, but kids hear more than parents realize. David had gone completely white. She can't remember me. We never met. I made sure. You made sure of what? I demanded. The silence stretched for 10 seconds that felt like hours. David, Marcus said slowly, what the hell did you do? David's phone buzzed on the counter. A text message from an unknown number, asterisk Mr. Mitchell, this is Chloe Chen. I think we need to talk. I'm driving up from San Francisco today, asterisk. All three of us stared at the phone. She's coming here, I whispered. Today. David's legs seemed to give out. He grabbed the counter for support, his knuckles white against the granite. This wasn't supposed to happen, he said, more to himself than to us. She was supposed to take the job at Morrison, Klein. I was going to introduce myself gradually. Tell her I was a friend of Rebecca's, someone who wanted to help with her career. His voice cracked. I had it all planned out. The pieces clicked together in my mind with sickening clarity. The job at Morrison, Klein. You arranged it. David nodded miserably. I've been corresponding with their HR department for months, recommending her for freelance graphic design work. I never signed my real name, just used a reference from her school. Jesus Christ, David, Marcus breathed. You manipulated her job search to get her to Portland? I wanted to be part of her life. David exploded. Rebecca died before I could meet her daughter properly. Before we could be a real family. I thought if Chloe was here, if she got to know me naturally. You thought you could replace the family you destroyed? Marcus's voice was deadly quiet. My phone rang. Lisa's name on the caller ID. Sarah, turn on Channel 8 News right now, she said without preamble. I fumbled for the TV remote, switching to the local news station. A perfectly coiffed reporter stood in front of Morrison, Klein and Associates, speaking into a microphone. Federal investigation has expanded to include potential stalking charges, as authorities examine evidence that Mitchell may have been manipulating a young woman's employment opportunities to bring her to Portland without her knowledge. David made a choking sound. The reporter continued, 24-year-old Chloe Chen, daughter of Mitchell's deceased former girlfriend, was allegedly unaware that her recent job opportunities were being facilitated by the man now accused of embezzling funds that were sent to support her education. Marcus was already pulling out his phone. I have to call her. She's probably halfway here by now, driving straight into this nightmare. But before he could dial, my doorbell rang. Through the front window, I could see a young woman with dark hair standing on my porch, her hand raised to ring the bell again. She looked exactly like Emma. The doorbell rang again, more insistent this time. Through the peephole, I could see Chloe Chen clearly, 24 years old, Rebecca's dark hair, David's jawline, and an expression of determined confusion that reminded me painfully of Emma when she was working through a difficult math problem. I'll get it, I said, but David was already moving toward the door like a man walking to his execution. David, no, Marcus said sharply. Let me handle this. But David was past listening. He opened the door with shaking hands, and for a moment, nobody spoke. Chloe looked between David and Marcus, recognition dawning slowly on her face. Dad, she said to Marcus, then turned to David. And you're David Mitchell. It wasn't a question. Chloe, David's voice was barely a whisper. You shouldn't be here. The news, the investigation. The investigation into you stealing money that was sent to me, Chloe said calmly. She was smaller than I'd expected, maybe 5'4", wearing jeans and a Stanford sweatshirt. But her voice carried an authority that made all three adults step back. Money I didn't know was coming from you. Money that paid for my college while you had 3 kids of your own. She looked past David to me. You must be Sarah. I'm sorry we're meeting like this. Come in, I said, because someone needed to take control of this situation. All of you. Before the neighbors start taking pictures. In my living room, the room where David had told me I was never his favorite 4 days ago, Chloe Chen sat in the same chair I'd occupied during that conversation. The symmetry felt deliberate, like the universe had a sense of dramatic irony. I remember you now, she said to David. You came to our house once, right before my parents' divorce. You and my mom were arguing in the kitchen, and you said you wanted to meet me properly. That you wanted us to be a family. David's face crumpled. Chloe. My mom told you no. She said I wasn't part of whatever you two had together. Chloe's voice remained steady, but I saw her hands trembling. She said you needed to choose between having an affair and having a stepdaughter. You couldn't have both. The room went completely silent. Is that why she was leaving your apartment the night she died? Chloe continued. Because you were still pushing her to choose? David made a sound like he was drowning. She was going to leave Marcus. We had plans. Stop. Chloe held up her hand. Just stop. I don't want to hear about your plans. She turned to Marcus. Dad, I need you to take me home. And Mr. Mitchell? She looked directly at David. I'm returning every penny you sent. The FBI can sort out where it came from, but I don't want stolen money paying for my life. She stood to leave, then paused at the living room entrance. Mrs. Mitchell, your husband spent 5 years trying to buy a relationship with me instead of building real relationships with your children. I looked him up before I drove here. She met my eyes with quiet compassion. Emma's art portfolio is incredible. Jake's essay about overcoming adversity won a state competition. Mia's reading at a 5th grade level in 1st grade. They're amazing kids who deserved a father who saw them as his favorites. After Chloe and Marcus left, David and I sat in our living room as the late afternoon sun slanted through windows I'd cleaned just last week. Sarah, he said finally. I'm sorry. For all of it. You and the kids deserved so much better. I looked at this broken man I'd shared 12 years with, and realized that his apology didn't hurt anymore. It was just words from someone who'd finally run out of ways to avoid the truth. You're right, I said simply. We did. My phone buzzed with a text from Lisa. The kids are asking when they can come home. David, I said, standing up. Tomorrow morning, you're going to tell Emma, Jake, and Mia that you made mistakes that hurt our family. You're going to apologize to them without making excuses. And then you're going to help me explain why Daddy won't be living here anymore. He nodded, tears streaming down his face. And David? When you tell them you're sorry, don't you dare mention Rebecca's name. For once in your life, make this about the family you actually had instead of the one you lost. 6 months later, I sat in my new apartment, smaller but bright, with a view of Emma's school, reading a letter that had arrived that morning. Asterisk Mrs. Mitchell, you don't know me, but I'm Chloe Chen. I wanted you to know that I testified honestly at your ex-husband's sentencing hearing. He received 18 months in federal prison and 5 years probation. I also wanted you to know that I'm using the money I saved by refusing his payments to start a scholarship fund for children of divorced families. The first recipient is a 14-year-old girl from Portland whose essay about her mother's strength impressed our selection committee. Emma Mitchell will receive $5,000 toward her college education. I thought you'd want to know your daughter is remarkable. Sincerely, Chloe asterisk. Emma burst through the front door at that moment, home from school and glowing with excitement about the photography class I'd finally been able to afford. Mom. Mrs. Rodriguez says I have a real eye for composition, she called, dumping her backpack by the door with the casual confidence of a teenager who knew she was loved completely. I folded Chloe's letter carefully and smiled. My daughter had always been my favorite.